Everything might be aligning in your favor right now, even if life looks nothing like the future you hoped for. The strange thing about transformation is that it rarely feels like progress while it is happening. More often it feels like confusion. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like losing things that once felt secure. Yet some of the most important turning points in life begin at the exact moment everything seems to be falling apart. Years later, what looked like a setback is revealed as a redirection. What looked like an ending becomes a beginning. The Stoics understood a truth that many people spend their lives resisting. Reality is rarely the source of suffering. Our judgment of reality is. The mind sees uncertainty and predicts disaster. It sees an obstacle and assumes defeat. It sees a closed door and concludes the path has ended. But life has a way of exposing the limits of those conclusions. Many of the things that once seemed like interruptions were quietly guiding us toward greater wisdom, greater resilience, and a version of ourselves that could not have emerged any other way. Sometimes the path forward first appears as the path breaking apart beneath our feet. Sometimes what feels like loss is creating space. Sometimes what feels like chaos is the beginning of a deeper order that cannot yet be seen. The challenge is that while we are living through these moments, we rarely recognize them for what they are. We only see the uncertainty. We only see what is disappearing. And that is why perspective matters. Because the meaning assigned to an experience often determines whether it becomes a prison or a doorway. Much of life is spent preparing for disasters that never arrive. The mind has a remarkable ability to travel into the future, constructing vivid scenarios of loss, failure, embarrassment, and uncertainty. It does this so automatically that most people never stop to question whether these predictions deserve their trust. A single unanswered message becomes evidence that something is wrong. A delayed opportunity becomes proof that the future is collapsing. A small mistake grows into a catastrophe inside the imagination. Yet when those moments finally pass, reality is often far less dramatic than the story created around them. The discomfort may be real, but much of the suffering was manufactured long before the event ever arrived. This is one of the oldest habits of the human mind. It confuses uncertainty with danger and treats the unknown as though it were already a confirmed threat. Recognizing this creates a subtle but powerful shift in perspective. Instead of treating every fearful thought as a warning, it becomes possible to see thoughts for what they are, suggestions rather than facts. Not every prediction deserves belief. Not every thought deserves obedience. The mind produces countless impressions throughout the day, many of them exaggerated, incomplete, or simply untrue. Wisdom begins with learning to observe those impressions before immediately accepting them. The Stoics practiced this deliberately because they understood that the space between an event and a reaction contains enormous power. Within that space lies the opportunity to examine what is happening, rather than being carried away by it. If these ideas help you see yourself and the world more clearly, consider subscribing. Stoicism is not about collecting information. It is about practicing a way of seeing. And sometimes a single insight, applied consistently, can change the direction of an entire life. The strange part is that this process often feels responsible. Worry disguises itself as preparation. It convinces people that if they think about a problem long enough, they can somehow protect themselves from future pain. But preparation and rumination are not the same thing. Preparation focuses on what can be done. Rumination circles endlessly around what cannot yet be controlled. One creates clarity, the other creates exhaustion. Because the two can feel similar, many people spend years trapped in mental loops that produce no meaningful results. They mistake constant thinking for progress, even while their peace quietly disappears. This becomes easier to recognize when looking back. There were likely moments that once felt overwhelming, situations that seemed impossible to navigate, decisions that carried enormous emotional weight. At the time, the uncertainty felt unbearable. The future appeared threatening simply because it was hidden. Yet eventually the future arrived, as it always does. Some fears proved unnecessary, others unfolded very differently than expected. Even the difficulties that did occur were often manageable once they became real. The mind had transformed them into something far larger, while they remained distant possibilities. Looking back reveals a pattern that is difficult to ignore. Reality is often far more workable than imagination predicts. 6. One of the most difficult experiences in life is watching something familiar begin to disappear. It could be a relationship, a job, a routine, a dream, or even a version of yourself that once felt permanent. The instinctive reaction is often the same. Something is being lost, therefore something must be going wrong. The mind immediately begins measuring what has disappeared instead of examining what remains. It interprets change as evidence of decline. It sees an ending and assumes failure. Yet this interpretation is not always accurate. In fact, some of the most important periods of growth begin with the dismantling of something that was never meant to stay forever. The challenge is that while change is happening, it rarely announces its purpose. It simply arrives, disrupts what feels comfortable, and leaves people searching for explanations. This is where resistance often enters the picture. Human beings naturally become attached to what is familiar. Familiarity creates a sense of safety, even when the situation itself is no longer beneficial. A person can outgrow an environment and still feel reluctant to leave it. They can recognize that a relationship no longer brings peace and still struggle to let go. They can continue holding on to habits that no longer support their well-being simply because those habits have become part of their identity. The discomfort of change frequently feels greater than the discomfort of staying the same. As a result, people remain attached to circumstances that quietly limit their growth. They tell themselves that maintaining stability is the safest option, not realizing that stagnation often carries its own form of risk. As Seneca observed, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Letting go is rarely comfortable, but growth often asks for what comfort refuses to surrender. The Stoics understood that suffering becomes heavier when reality and expectation move in opposite directions. Much of emotional pain comes from demanding that life remain exactly as it is. The mind creates a picture of how things should unfold, then becomes distressed when reality refuses to cooperate. Yet life has never operated according to personal preferences alone. Everything changes. People change. Circumstances change. Priorities change. Entire seasons of life come and go. Resisting this process does not stop it from happening. It merely creates additional tension while it unfolds. Acceptance was never about passivity. It was about seeing clearly. It was about recognizing what is happening without exhausting yourself fighting against facts that cannot be undone. There is a subtle difference between losing something and being released from something. At first glance, they may appear identical. Both involve separation. Both involve uncertainty. Both can trigger grief. Yet the meaning behind them is entirely different. When something leaves, the immediate assumption is often that a valuable piece of life has been taken away. But time has a curious way of revealing hidden perspectives. Situations that once felt devastating sometimes reveal themselves as necessary. Relationships that ended unexpectedly may have prevented years of deeper unhappiness. Opportunities that disappeared may have redirected attention toward paths that proved more meaningful. The mind rarely sees these possibilities in the moment because it is focused on what is missing rather than what is emerging. Part of the difficulty comes from the space that exists between endings and beginnings. This space is uncomfortable because it lacks clear definition. The old reality is fading, but the new reality has not yet fully appeared. There are no guarantees, no clear signs, no immediate reassurance that everything is moving in the right direction. This uncertainty often creates the illusion that nothing is happening. Yet some of the most important transformations occur during these quiet periods. Seeds grow beneath the surface long before visible signs appear above the ground. Human growth often follows a similar pattern. Changes take place internally before they become visible externally. Patience becomes difficult precisely because progress is not always obvious. The mind, however, prefers immediate evidence. It wants certainty. It wants proof that the discomfort serves a purpose. When proof is unavailable, fear often fills the empty space. Thoughts begin creating explanations that support the worst possible interpretation. Perhaps everything is falling apart. Perhaps nothing will improve. Perhaps this loss means permanent decline. Yet these conclusions are usually formed long before enough information exists to justify them. They are emotional reactions disguised as objective observations. The future remains unwritten, but the mind behaves as though it already knows the ending. This tendency creates unnecessary suffering because it transforms uncertainty into imagined certainty, usually in the most negative direction possible. A different perspective becomes available when attention shifts away from what has been removed and toward what is being revealed. Every ending exposes something. It reveals attachments that were previously invisible. It reveals assumptions that were never questioned. It reveals strengths that may have remained dormant under easier circumstances. People often discover resilience only after being forced to rely on it. They discover courage only when comfort disappears. They discover clarity only after confusion strips away distractions. The very experiences that initially feel like setbacks frequently uncover qualities that could not have emerged any other way. This does not mean pretending that loss feels pleasant. Genuine acceptance does not require denying emotional reality. Sadness, disappointment, and grief are natural responses to change. The Stoics never suggested becoming emotionally numb. Rather, they encouraged a deeper understanding of what emotions are communicating. Pain often signals attachment. Fear often signals uncertainty. Frustration often signals resistance. Observing these reactions without becoming consumed by them creates space for wisdom to emerge. Instead of immediately concluding that something terrible has happened, it becomes possible to remain curious about what the experience might eventually reveal. Over time, life provides enough evidence to challenge the assumption that every ending is a tragedy. Looking back, many people can identify moments they desperately wanted to avoid, only to realize later that those moments altered the course of their lives for the better. The difficulty is that this understanding usually arrives after the fact. It rarely appears during the middle of the struggle. Yet remembering this pattern can bring a certain steadiness when facing uncertainty. Not every closed door represents rejection. Not every disruption represents failure. Sometimes life removes what no longer fits, even when the mind insists on holding on. Marcus Aurelius captured this idea when he wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." The very thing that appears to block progress may eventually reveal itself as the path that made growth possible. And perhaps that is why acceptance requires so much courage. It asks for trust without demanding certainty. It asks for patience before visible results appear. It asks for the willingness to release what has already completed its purpose, even when doing so feels uncomfortable. In that space between what was and what will be, growth quietly continues its work. The old gradually fades. The new slowly takes shape. And although the process often feels unsettling, it may be creating room for possibilities that could never emerge while the past remained firmly in place. The discomfort of uncertainty is not really about the future itself. It comes from the mind's desire to know what cannot yet be known. Human beings naturally seek stability. There is comfort in clear answers, predictable outcomes, and familiar paths. When those things are absent, the mind often interprets the situation as a problem that needs to be solved immediately. It begins searching for certainty where certainty does not exist. It wants reassurance before taking action. It wants guarantees before making a commitment. It wants evidence before investing effort. Yet life rarely provides these conditions. The most important opportunities arrive without complete instructions. The most meaningful decisions come without absolute proof. There is always a portion of the journey hidden from view. That hidden portion is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. This becomes easier to understand when looking at any significant achievement. Whether it involves building a career, developing a skill, improving a relationship, or creating a better future, every meaningful step begins before the outcome is visible. No one receives certainty at the beginning. No one is handed a detailed map showing every challenge, every success, and every lesson in advance. Instead, progress unfolds gradually. One decision leads to another. One action creates new possibilities. One effort reveals information that was previously unavailable. The path becomes clearer only after movement begins. Waiting for complete certainty before taking action often means waiting forever. The mind resists this reality because uncertainty feels vulnerable. There is always a chance that effort may not produce immediate results. There is always the possibility of setbacks, mistakes, or unexpected obstacles. Yet avoiding uncertainty does not eliminate risk. It simply exchanges one form of discomfort for another. The discomfort of action is replaced by the discomfort of stagnation. The discomfort of growth is replaced by the discomfort of regret. Many people spend years waiting for the perfect moment, not realizing that the perfect moment is often created through consistent action rather than discovered through endless analysis. The Stoics approached this challenge differently. Rather than becoming consumed by outcomes, they focused their attention on what could actually be controlled. They understood that many of life's most important variables exist outside personal influence. Other people's opinions cannot be fully controlled. External events cannot be fully controlled. Timing cannot be fully controlled. The future itself cannot be controlled. Yet actions remain available, choices remain available, attitudes remain available. This shift in focus creates a remarkable sense of freedom because it redirects energy away from endless speculation and toward meaningful effort. This perspective also changes the way confidence is understood. Many people believe confidence is something that must appear before action can occur. They wait until they feel ready. They wait until fear disappears. They wait until doubt is gone. But confidence rarely arrives in advance. More often it develops afterward. It grows through experience. It grows through repetition. It grows through proving to yourself that discomfort can be tolerated and challenges can be faced. Every small action completed despite uncertainty becomes evidence. Every difficult situation navigated successfully becomes evidence. Over time, those experiences accumulate into something that feels like confidence, but the foundation was built through action all along. This explains why people often underestimate their own capabilities. They look at a future challenge and focus entirely on what they currently lack. They see the skills they have not developed, the knowledge they have not acquired, and the obstacles they have not overcome. What they fail to consider is the person they will become while moving toward the challenge. Growth does not happen beforehand. Growth happens during the process itself. The very experiences that seem intimidating are often the experiences responsible for building strength. Without difficulty, resilience remains untested. Without uncertainty, courage remains theoretical. The qualities people admire in others are usually developed through situations those individuals once felt unprepared to face. As this understanding deepens, the relationship with uncertainty begins to change. The unknown no longer appears solely as a source of threat. It also becomes a source of possibility. After all, uncertainty works both ways. The same future that contains potential difficulties also contains potential opportunities. The practical result of this mindset is surprisingly simple. Instead of becoming trapped in questions about what might happen months or years from now, attention returns to what can be done today. Small actions gain importance. Daily habits gain importance. Consistency gains importance. These things may appear insignificant when viewed individually, but their cumulative effect is profound. A single step rarely changes a life. Thousands of steps often do. Progress is usually quieter than people expect. It emerges gradually through repeated effort rather than dramatic breakthroughs. When people think about strength, They often imagine confidence, certainty, and fearlessness. They picture someone who never hesitates, never doubts, and never struggles internally. Yet real strength rarely looks like that. More often, it appears in ordinary moments that most people never notice. It appears when someone continues despite uncertainty. It appears when a person honors a commitment even when motivation has disappeared. It appears when discomfort is present, yet action continues anyway. The strongest people are not necessarily those who feel less fear. In many cases, they simply have a different relationship with fear. They no longer treat it as a command. They recognize it as part of the experience of being human, but they do not allow it to make every decision for them. As Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to move forward without surrendering to it. This understanding changes the way courage is viewed. Courage is often mistaken for the absence of fear, when in reality, fear is usually part of the process. Every meaningful step forward contains some degree of uncertainty. There is uncertainty when speaking honestly. There is uncertainty when pursuing a new opportunity. There is uncertainty when leaving behind something familiar in order to grow. If people waited until all fear disappeared, very little would ever happen. Life would remain trapped within the boundaries of comfort. Yet comfort has limits. It can provide temporary security, but it cannot provide expansion. Growth requires movement beyond what already feels known. The individuals who seem most resilient are often the ones who stopped expecting confidence to arrive first. They learned that confidence frequently follows action rather than precedes it. This lesson becomes clearer when observing how trust is built. Trust does not emerge from positive thinking alone. It develops through repeated experiences. A friendship grows stronger because people consistently show up for one another. Respect grows stronger because actions repeatedly align with words. Reliability is created through evidence accumulated over time. The same principle applies internally. The relationship a person has with themselves follows similar rules. Self-trust is not created through promises. It is created through keeping promises. Every time a commitment is honored, a small piece of evidence is added to the foundation. Every time an excuse is rejected in favor of action, that foundation becomes stronger. Over time, these moments accumulate into something remarkably powerful. The opposite process happens as well. When promises are repeatedly broken, trust weakens. This applies whether the promise was made to another person or to oneself. Consider how often people commit to changes they genuinely desire. They decide to exercise regularly, develop a new skill, improve their habits, or pursue a meaningful goal. The intention is sincere. The motivation feels real. Yet when discomfort appears, the commitment quietly disappears. This pattern is so common that many people begin expecting it from themselves. They stop believing their own promises because previous experiences have taught them that enthusiasm tends to fade. The issue is not a lack of potential. The issue is the gradual erosion of trust that occurs when words and actions consistently move in different directions. What makes this especially valuable is that the benefits extend beyond the immediate task. Completing a difficult workout is not only about physical health. Finishing a project is not only about productivity. Following through on a commitment is not only about the specific outcome. Each action sends a message. It becomes evidence that discomfort can be tolerated. It becomes proof that intentions can be transformed into reality. The task itself may be important, but the deeper impact often lies in the identity being reinforced through repeated behavior. People gradually become what they repeatedly practice. This process is rarely dramatic. There are usually no life-changing revelations, no sudden transformations, no moment where everything instantly becomes easy. Instead, change tends to occur quietly. One choice at a time, one action at a time, one promise kept at a time. Because the progress is gradual, it is often overlooked. People focus on major milestones while ignoring the small decisions responsible for creating them. Yet large achievements are typically built upon ordinary moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Consistency possesses a kind of power that is easy to underestimate precisely because its effects are not always immediately visible. As consistency continues, something begins to shift internally. Challenges that once felt intimidating become familiar. Tasks that once required enormous effort become routine. Situations that once triggered hesitation no longer carry the same emotional weight. This does not happen because life becomes easier. It happens because capability expands. The individual facing the challenge is no longer the same person who initially doubted their ability. Experience has changed them. Repeated action has changed them. The evidence collected through consistent effort has changed them. Eventually, the question stops being whether they are capable. The answer has already been demonstrated through behavior. There is a quiet confidence that emerges from this process. It differs from arrogance because it is not based on assumptions. It is based on experience. It does not require constant validation because it has already been tested. It does not disappear whenever difficulties arise because difficulties were part of its formation. This kind of confidence is less concerned with predicting outcomes and more concerned with responding effectively to whatever happens. It is grounded in adaptability rather than certainty. That distinction matters because certainty is rarely available, but adaptability can always be strengthened. As Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Real confidence comes from knowing that whatever happens, you can meet it with reason, resilience, and the willingness to adapt. As a result, the way a person sees themselves begins to evolve. They stop identifying primarily with their fears, doubts, or past failures. They begin identifying with their ability to act despite those things. The focus shifts from limitations to capability, from hesitation to engagement, from intention to execution. This transformation rarely happens overnight, but once it begins, it influences every area of life. The external circumstances may change gradually, yet the internal shift often becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. And it all starts with something surprisingly simple: keeping one promise, then another, and continuing to do so long enough for trust to take root. One of the most powerful realizations a person can have is that many of the beliefs shaping their life were never consciously chosen. They were inherited, collected, absorbed over time. A careless comment from a parent, a rejection that arrived during a vulnerable moment, a criticism repeated often enough to sound like truth. These experiences may seem small when viewed individually, yet the mind has a tendency to gather them together and turn them into conclusions. Eventually, those conclusions become stories. The stories become assumptions, and before long, assumptions begin shaping identity. A person no longer thinks they experienced failure. They begin believing they are a failure. They no longer think they were rejected. They begin believing they are unworthy of acceptance. What started as a temporary event quietly transforms into a permanent label. The problem is that the mind rarely announces when this transformation occurs. It happens gradually, so gradually that most people never notice it happening at all. A child enters the world without complex beliefs about worth, capability, or status. Those ideas are learned through experience. As life unfolds, certain moments leave stronger impressions than others. Emotional experiences tend to carry particular weight because the mind interprets them as important. The more emotionally charged an event becomes, the more likely it is to influence future perceptions. This process can be useful when it teaches practical lessons, but it becomes harmful when isolated experiences begin defining an entire sense of self. Consider how often people describe themselves using the language of old wounds. Someone who experienced rejection may carry an ongoing fear of being unwanted. Someone who was frequently criticized may become convinced they are never good enough. Someone who failed in one area may begin assuming they are incapable in many others. These conclusions often feel objective because they have been repeated internally for years. Yet familiarity should not be confused with truth. A thought can be repeated thousands of times and still be inaccurate. This is where many people become trapped without realizing it. They spend years trying to change external conditions while carrying internal assumptions that quietly undermine every effort. Opportunities appear, yet self-doubt interprets them as risks. Compliments are offered, yet old beliefs dismiss them. Progress occurs, yet the mind focuses exclusively on perceived shortcomings. The Stoics approached this challenge from a perspective that remains remarkably relevant. They recognize that external events and internal judgments are not the same thing. An event occurs, then a judgment is attached to it. Most people experience these as a single process because the judgment arrives so quickly that it appears inseparable from the event itself. Yet there is a difference. A mistake is an event. Deciding that the mistake proves personal inadequacy is a judgment. Rejection is an event. Deciding that rejection proves unworthiness is a judgment. Failure is an event. Deciding that failure defines identity is a judgment. Learning to separate these layers creates room for a very different relationship with experience. At first, this separation can feel uncomfortable because many people have spent so long identifying with their thoughts that they struggle to imagine themselves apart from them. If a belief has been present for years, it can begin to feel like a permanent feature of reality. Yet thoughts are not facts. They are interpretations. They are mental representations influenced by emotions, memories, and past experiences. Some interpretations are useful, others are distorted. Wisdom often begins with questioning assumptions that have gone unchallenged for too long. Not every thought deserves automatic trust simply because it appears in the mind. This realization creates an opportunity that many people overlook. If beliefs were learned, they can also be examined. If they were reinforced through repetition, they can be weakened through awareness. This does not happen through denial or forced positivity. It happens through honest observation. A person begins noticing the stories they tell themselves. They notice recurring patterns of self-criticism. They notice assumptions that automatically appear whenever challenges arise. Instead of accepting those thoughts as reality, they begin asking whether the evidence truly supports them. Often it does not. What seemed like a permanent truth turns out to be a habit of interpretation. As awareness increases, freedom begins to emerge. Not the freedom of controlling every circumstance, but the freedom of no longer being controlled by every thought. There is a profound difference between experiencing a thought and obeying it. Most people spend years doing the latter without realizing another option exists. A fear appears, and it is treated as a warning. A doubt appears, and it is treated as a prediction. A criticism appears, and it is treated as a fact. Yet thoughts are merely mental events. They come and go. Some contain wisdom, others contain confusion. Learning the difference changes everything. One of the most important truths a person can discover is that events do not automatically determine outcomes. The same experience can produce entirely different results depending on how it is understood. This can be difficult to accept at first because it is natural to focus on circumstances. When something goes wrong, attention immediately moves toward the event itself, the loss, the setback, the disappointment, the obstacle. Yet circumstances tell only part of the story. Between what happens and what follows lies interpretation, and interpretation carries far more influence than many people realize. Two individuals can walk through the same storm and emerge with completely different perspectives, not because the storm treated them differently, but because they assigned different meanings to the experience. This principle can be observed throughout life. One person experiences rejection and concludes they are not good enough. Another experiences the same rejection and sees it as information. One views a failed attempt as proof that success is impossible. Another views it as evidence that improvement is still necessary. The external event remains identical. What changes is the story built around it. The mind is constantly creating explanations for what happens. It searches for meaning, it searches for patterns, it searches for conclusions. Yet those conclusions are often shaped less by reality and more by perspective. This is why some challenges strengthen people, while the same challenges leave others feeling defeated. Part of the reason this happens is that comfort rarely demands transformation. When everything proceeds according to plan, there is little incentive to question assumptions or develop new capabilities. Comfort has its place, but it does not always encourage growth. Difficulties, on the other hand, tend to expose weaknesses, limitations, and blind spots. They force adaptation. They require effort. They demand attention. While these experiences are rarely enjoyable in the moment, they often become the catalyst for meaningful development. Growth frequently emerges from circumstances that initially seem undesirable. This does not mean every challenge should be celebrated or that suffering automatically produces wisdom. Hardship alone guarantees nothing. The difference lies in how a person engages with the experience. Some people become consumed by bitterness. Others become curious. Some focus entirely on what was lost. Others begin examining what can still be gained. The event may be beyond control, but the response remains open. This is where perspective exerts its influence. It shapes what lessons are noticed, what opportunities are pursued, and what conclusions are carried forward. Perspective also influences the way people relate to fear. Fear often magnifies difficulties before they occur. It presents challenges as larger than they are, and capabilities as smaller than they truly are. This creates an imbalance. The obstacle grows in the imagination, while personal strength is underestimated. Yet experience frequently reveals a different reality. Many situations that once appeared overwhelming become manageable once they are faced directly. The anticipation often proves more distressing than the event itself. This is because fear tends to focus attention exclusively on what could go wrong, while ignoring the possibility of adaptation and growth. As understanding deepens, a subtle shift begins to occur. Obstacles no longer appear solely as interruptions. They become information. They become opportunities to develop patience, discipline, courage, and perspective. The focus gradually moves away from wishing circumstances were different and toward making effective use of circumstances as they exist. This does not remove difficulty, but it changes the relationship with difficulty. Resistance decreases, engagement increases, energy that was previously spent fighting reality becomes available for responding to it. Looking back, many of the experiences that once seemed unfair or unwanted often occupy an unexpected place in memory. They become significant not because they were pleasant, but because they revealed something important. They exposed strengths that were previously unknown. They challenged assumptions that needed to be questioned. They redirected attention toward paths that might otherwise have been ignored. The discomfort was real, yet so was the growth that followed. Comfort rarely leaves that kind of mark. This realization invites a different perspective on future challenges. Difficulties still deserve respect. Obstacles still require effort. Yet they no longer need to be viewed exclusively as threats. Within every challenge exists the possibility of learning, adaptation, and growth. The outcome is never determined by the event alone. Interpretation matters. Response matters. The meaning assigned to the experience matters. And when that understanding takes root, fear begins to lose some of its authority. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because it becomes clear that obstacles and opportunities are often separated by nothing more than perspective. Much of human suffering comes from a quiet assumption that certainty must exist before peace can exist. People often believe they need to know how things will unfold before they can relax. They want reassurance that their efforts will succeed, that their relationships will last, that their plans will work out, and that tomorrow will look the way they hope it will. Yet life rarely offers those guarantees. The future remains hidden, regardless of how much energy is spent trying to predict it. This reality can feel uncomfortable at first, because the mind naturally seeks security. It wants something solid to hold on to. It wants promises about outcomes that have not yet arrived. But over time, a different realization becomes possible. Peace does not come from controlling uncertainty. Peace comes from developing the ability to face uncertainty without being overwhelmed by it. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The search for certainty often leads outward, while peace is found by strengthening what remains within your control. The Stoics understood this distinction with remarkable clarity. They never suggested that life would become easy, or that difficulties could be avoided through wisdom alone. They understood that setbacks, disappointments, loss, and unexpected challenges are woven into the human experience. No amount of preparation can remove every obstacle. No philosophy can prevent every hardship. What they recognized, however, was that the human capacity to adapt is often far greater than people assume. Most individuals spend far more time doubting their resilience than testing it. They underestimate themselves long before life has the opportunity to reveal what they are truly capable of handling. This tendency becomes obvious when looking back on difficult periods. There were likely moments that felt impossible while they were happening. Situations that seemed too painful, too uncertain, or too overwhelming to navigate. At the time, it may have appeared as though there was no clear path forward, yet somehow, step by step, those moments were survived. Solutions appeared, adjustments were made, lessons were learned, strength developed quietly in the background. What once felt unbearable eventually became part of the past. The challenge may have left scars, but it also left evidence. Evidence that adaptation is possible, evidence that resilience is real, evidence that human beings are capable of more than they often believe. The mind tends to forget this evidence. Instead of remembering previous victories over adversity, it focuses on future possibilities that have not yet occurred. It imagines new challenges as though they exist in isolation from every difficulty that has already been overcome. This creates a distorted picture. The future appears larger and more threatening because personal strength is excluded from the equation. Fear performs this trick repeatedly. It magnifies uncertainty while minimizing capability. It highlights risks while ignoring resilience. It directs attention toward what could go wrong while overlooking everything that has already been survived. As awareness grows, it becomes easier to notice this pattern. The mind predicts disaster, then reality unfolds differently. The mind assumes weakness, then strength emerges when needed. The mind demands certainty, then life moves forward without providing it. These experiences reveal an important truth. Confidence is not created by knowing exactly what will happen. Confidence is created by trusting that whatever happens can be faced. This is a very different kind of security. One depends on controlling circumstances, the other depends on developing character. Since circumstances remain unpredictable, the second approach offers far greater stability. There is something deeply freeing about shifting attention away from the impossible task of predicting every outcome. The future contains too many variables, too many unknowns, too many moving parts. Trying to control all of them creates endless tension because success remains impossible. Yet when focus returns to personal responses, actions and choices, a sense of clarity begins to emerge. The future no longer needs to be solved in advance. It only needs to be met when it arrives. This understanding reduces unnecessary pressure because it replaces the demand for certainty with the willingness to adapt. Adaptation is one of the most overlooked strengths a person can possess. It rarely receives the same attention as intelligence, talent, or ambition, yet it often determines long-term success more than any of those qualities. Life changes, circumstances shift, plans evolve, unexpected events appear without warning. The ability to adjust without losing direction becomes invaluable. Those who adapt effectively are not necessarily the strongest in a traditional sense. They are often simply the most flexible. They remain open to learning. They remain willing to adjust their approach. They continue moving forward even when conditions are different from what they expected. This flexibility creates a healthier relationship with uncertainty. Instead of viewing the unknown as a threat, it becomes something that naturally accompanies growth. Every meaningful chapter of life begins before the outcome is visible. Every significant opportunity contains elements that cannot be predicted. Every worthwhile goal involves stepping into territory that has not been fully explored. Waiting for complete certainty would prevent movement altogether. Progress requires a willingness to act despite incomplete information. It requires trust that understanding will develop through experience rather than before it. Over time, this trust begins to deepen. Not necessarily trust that everything will unfold according to plan, because life rarely follows any plan perfectly. Rather, trust that regardless of what unfolds, there will be an opportunity to respond, an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to adapt. This perspective changes the emotional weight of uncertainty. The future no longer appears as a looming threat that must be controlled. Instead, it becomes a space filled with possibilities that have not yet revealed themselves. This does not eliminate fear completely. Fear remains part of the human experience. What changes is its influence. Fear loses some of its authority when it is no longer treated as a reliable predictor of reality. It becomes one voice among many rather than the voice making every decision. And when that shift occurs, something remarkable happens. The future stops feeling like an enemy waiting to prove every worry correct. It begins feeling like an unfolding story. One that will contain challenges, certainly, but also opportunities, lessons, growth, and moments that cannot yet be imagined. And perhaps that is enough. Not certainty, not guarantees, just the quiet confidence that whatever comes next can be met with the same resilience that carried you through everything that came before. Remember this: the future has never asked for perfection from you. It has only asked that you keep going. Every challenge you have survived, every setback you have endured, and every difficult season you have walked through has quietly prepared you for what comes next. Life may not unfold exactly as planned, but that does not mean it is unfolding incorrectly. Sometimes the path becomes clear only after you have had the courage to keep moving through the uncertainty. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to watch one of the videos on your screen right now. Continue the journey. Continue strengthening the mind, deepening your perspective, and discovering what is truly within your control.